Offensive ideas. Offensive ideas consist of bayonet leaders, national conscripts, superior firepower, glorious arms, engineer corps, grand army, esprit de corps, and the finisher. So, bayonet leaders. Your land leaders get an extra shock pip. So, your land leaders, generals, and conquistadors get a bonus 1 when rolling their pips towards shock, which can lead to pip overflow into other categories, so it's a passive buff to other things as well. That being said, you wouldn't exactly be unhappy with a 6 shock leader that didn't have any other pips in anything else, at least for the first half of the game. You would still be giggling in delight at having such a leader. So the rollover isn't especially useful, but it's worth mentioning. When is the extra shock relevant? The extra shock is especially relevant early to mid-game, when shock is king and fire is still absolute rubbish, and cannons aren't yet dealing them majority of the damage. Instead, everything is all about infantry and cavalry. The next idea, recruitment time. National conscripts gives you a minus 10% recruitment time for land units. Well, it helps you recover from stack wipe more quickly. Cannons will take a smaller fraction of half of a year to build, which is slightly useful. I don't like how long cannons take to build compared to infantry and cavalry, but oh well. Other than that, I mean, ideally you're not getting stack wiped, so hopefully you don't need the extra recruitment speed. That being said, it is occasionally helpful for building. It also helps you build mercs quicker, which can be very helpful for building something on the edge of your lands when a war starts to go de-siege something in a hurry, or to go be an extra little bit of reinforcement if you need it in a hurry. So it does have some use in that sense. The next idea, superior firepower. Unsurprisingly, assists your fire stat. Specifically, your land leaders, generals and conquistadors, get a bonus to fire when rolling their pips, which can again lead to pips rolling over into other categories. When is this good? Well, fire is especially good in the mid to late game, and when you have a full cannon backline. Glorious arms, plus 100% prestige from land battles. Well, doubling the amount of prestige you get from land battles is, I would say, as a general rule, pretty useless, because you don't get a very large amount to begin with. So plus 100% of a very small number is still a very small number. That being said, how does high prestige help you? Well, if it helps you get some prestige, prestige helps you with aggressive expansion, army morale, naval morale, and a slew of other things. So even if it isn't sort of a directly, you can't really feel the benefit that this gives you very much, and it is generally going to be a very small benefit, but it is a diffuse benefit in a lot of ways. Engineer Corps. Plus 20% siege ability. So, plus 20% siege ability is used when determining how long your siege cycles are. When you're sieging an enemy fort, your siege ability modifies the time period for a siege tick. So normally it's something like 30 days. If you have plus 20% siege ability, it helps make the siege 20% faster. So it only takes something like 25 days or some such. If your sieges are going faster, it helps you conserve manpower and money, because you're suffering less end of the month attrition ticks. You're suffering fewer costs to reinforce those losses from the attrition ticks, and it also potentially lets you engage in siege racing. So you rather than engaging the enemy's army directly, you walk around them, they walk around you, you go sit on each other's forts, and then because you have this siege ability, hopefully your siege of their fort finishes sooner than their siege of your fort. You then turn around, march your army back to the fort that they're sieging, push them off of it, and boom! You've got a siege done, they don't, you're winning the war. Grand Army idea is plus 20% land force limit modifier. This is a much more significant than you might imagine military buff. If you have 20% more units, your army is effectively 20% stronger. As long as you are keeping your army together enough that you can do reinforcements where needed, as in you can throw on top of a fight more reinforcement stacks, and it requires you to have a reasonable judgment of when you need to throw the reinforcement stacks on. You want your reinforcement stacks arriving, say, 3 or 4 days before your army would otherwise completely rout. So that you're dragging the fight out as long as possible, giving you the longest time for your enemy to be losing morale from the daily morale losses just from ongoing battles. Now, aside from the military applications, this has flow-on effects to your diplomacy. If you have a larger army, you look like a more attractive ally. You are a less attractive target to your enemies. It also helps keep your subjects in line because, more or less, aside from relative development level, the relative army size is the other significant component to working out how strong your vassals feel they are in relation to you. So if you have a larger army, it helps keep your vassals loyal. So it has some diplomatic applications as well, not just the obvious military ones. And the final idea, esprit de corps, plus 5% discipline. Discipline increases your army damage dealt and reduces damage received. It is also a tactics multiplier, which therefore indirectly assists with siege times, because tactics differences modifies siege speed. So it then has flow-on effects to economy and manpower savings, above and beyond just the fact that your units are killing the enemy units quicker than they're killing you, so you're minimizing your losses in a accumulative way. The finisher, plus 5% army morale recovery speed. So this helps your armies that are in enemy lands or even in your own lands that are engaging in a series of battles one after the other fairly quickly keep maximum morale. It also helps you get your armies from sort of mothballed status, if you will, from low maintenance up to full fighting strength, max morale, more quickly. So it lets you get onto a sort of war footing more swiftly from a peace footing. Overall, it's an okay idea. It's not great, it's sometimes a bit useful, but not amazing. Therefore, the summary for offensive ideas is that offensive ideas provide a series of direct combat buffs concentrating on increasing your leaders' combat pips, especially land leaders. It's concentrating on land leaders, not naval leaders, as well as your siege speed, as well as and finally by helping you to have a larger force limit army. So some of these contributions have flow-on effects to playing a subject-related game, to diplomacy, but mostly it is just a strong military idea group for tall play that is useful throughout the game.